Now we're going to look at Jean Piaget. Oops. And he is called or considered a cognitive theorist. So Piaget's theory, if you look in the book, they gave a really good, I love this book actually. All of the chapters are really good, give a lot of good information on all the theorists. But Piaget was considered a constructivist theorist, similar to John Dewey and similar to Maria Montessori. He actually studied under Maria Montessori. And he believed that children build their own knowledge. So basically they construct their own knowledge. That doesn't mean construction. I know in the John Dewey video, I showed you children actually constructing things, but construction in this sense means that they are just building their own knowledge. So they are continually building on each information that they get, and they're taking it in. And so they are constructing their own knowledge on an ongoing basis, and they learn best when they are actually doing that work themselves through play. And that is why we talk about play being integral in young childhood. They are developing and constantly revising their own knowledge. So any information they get, they take it in and they stick it into a schema, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Piaget has several stages of cognitive development. The first is sensory motor, which is birth to 18 months. And the second is preoperational, which is 18 months to 6 years old. So those are the two that we look at when we talk about early childhood education. Concrete operational is 6 to 12 years, and we're not going to talk about these last two in this PowerPoint, but concrete operational is when they start forming their ideas based on reasoning. So they're able to think about different objects and events, but their thinking is very limited and they're very concrete. They cannot have a lot of abstract thinking. 12 years and older is formal operational, and that's when they think conceptually and they can think hypothetically. And so that's when children also will start to get sarcasm. So in sensory motor stage, the first of Piaget's theories, he believed that babies' reactions are purely reflexive. So they are, even their breathing is a reflex. Their movement is a reflex, and they rely on their senses and physical activity to learn about the world. And a lot of times that's by mistake because of the fact that they are acting on instinct. Intelligence begins, he believed, when reactions become purposeful. So when they actually reach out for that toy instead of their arms flailing about to get it. Some of the cognitive milestones of sensory motor stage, the first would be object permanence. And that's when a baby comes to realize that something exists even when he can't see it. And so prior to object permanence, which begins about 8 months, anything that's out of sight is out of mind. They're not able to think about that object and hold on to it in their head because it's not within their vision. But then once around 8 months or so, they start to realize that things exist away from them. And that's also when separation anxiety comes into play. It's tied to object permanence because now they know that these people exist, their primary caregiver exists when they're not around. And they start showing preferences for who their favorite caregiver is or favorites. And babies make attempts to bring those people back into their sight by crying. In the next stage, preoperational stage, this is age 2 to 8, and preoperational thinking differs considerably from adult thinking. So it's a lot more limited. Children at this stage are egocentric. They're only able to take in their own point of view, and they can only focus on one characteristic of a thing or person at a time. And this is really interesting when you think about if you have a 4-year-old in your life, if you go outside with them at night and you ask them, what is the moon doing? If you see the moon up in the sky, most of the time children will say it's following me. If you're taking a walk, the moon's following me. And that is what Piaget considered egocentrism, that the world revolves around that child. There are other theorists right now that are trying to disprove this theory of egocentrism. So it might be called something else, but children do tend to think that things are about them at this age. They also overgeneralize from their limited experience, often incorrectly. So hopefully that trait has gone away as they become adults, because that's annoying. But as children, it's really kind of cute because they know that they know this happened one other time, and so it's always going to happen this way. So Piaget, I said schemas before, schemes. Piaget believed that infants, children, and adolescents create theories to try to understand events and objects around them. And I would actually argue that even adults do this as well. And these are psychological structures that organize experience. So we try and fit in any new information we take in, and we try and fit it into a file folder in our head. So what is something that we are trying to learn about, and we put it in a file folder, and oftentimes children get those file folders mixed up. So they're trying to make sense of the world by using these schemes. So in infancy, most of the schemes are based on actions, as far as reflexes, again, flailing about. They see that their hand hit on something, and they know that anytime they do this with their flail their arms, they can get a reaction. Another thing is when they cry, they can get a reaction a lot of times. Sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes it's not pleasant. So an example of this is if you are reading a book to a child, say a 2-year-old, and you are reading about farm animals, and you teach them about sheep, and you see the sheep on the page and they say fluffy, sheep are fluffy. And they're trying to identify, so they have a file folder in their head of sheep or farm animals from your book. And sheep is a file folder. Then they see a dog that looks like that bottom picture. And that dog has a lot of characteristics of that sheep, doesn't it? It's white and fluffy, and it doesn't look like maybe their dog. Maybe they have a Chihuahua, and that's what a dog looks like to children, is a Chihuahua. But then they see this thing and they say sheep. That's a sheep. And so the caregiver says, no, that's a dog. So then they're having to assimilate that new experience or new information and fit it into the file folder. It was shoved into the sheep file folder in their head, and now they have to take that out and they have to accommodate it into the dog file folder that they already had going. So now they know that there are Chihuahuas and there are white fluffy dogs. And so as they learn more about dogs, that file folder is going to expand. And their file folder on dogs is probably going to be much bigger than their file folder on sheep. When children take in this new information, they are assimilating it and accommodating it. So disequilibrium occurs when more time is spent on accommodation because those current schemes are just not adequate. And so if it's something that's troubling or they're not able to understand it, they're in a state of disequilibrium until they can actually expand that file folder and fit that new information where it goes. So according to the teacher, the role of the teacher is someone who nurtures inquiry and supports the child's own search for answers. So very similar to Dewey, very similar to Montessori. This in the sensory motor period, teachers should keep the baby safe but interested. Make sure that um, the classroom or the space around them should be clean, as well as safe for them to be able to explore, so that they can move around in their space and explore it. He also believed that we need lots and lots of language to just explain and describe, to narrate a baby's day, because they don't have the language yet, but they're so good at picking up language that they are listening to all of those words, and again, they are assimilating and accommodating those words and making sense of their day. During the pre-operational period, teachers should provide large blocks of free play. Does that sound familiar? We talked about that with Montessori. Values children's work, but don't interrupt if necessary. Value time outdoors and what children can gain from nature. Give them real world experiences. When we talk about the video from Dewey, when they were learning about bikes, they were not learning with toy bikes, they were learning with real bikes. Plan open-ended activities and ask open-ended questions. So activities without a predetermined result or a product, which is really important and something that a lot of preschools tend to not do. They have an end product in mind, but a lot of it is about experiences. And so he thought it was really important to use open-ended question rather than closed questions, because it puts them in a position of inquiry rather than being right or wrong. So why do you think it's doing this? Why do you think the sky is blue? Why do you think the moon is following you? Those kind of questions expands on their thinking and gets them thinking in different ways.